Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're excited to have all of you today. Today, we're going to be discussing the intersection between the economy and climate change. Given all of the economic inequality we've seen, we know that we cannot tackle climate change without looking at creating good jobs, what the green economy looks like, and making sure that we are creating opportunity for everyone. So with great pleasure, I would like to introduce our first keynote speaker. We have Alvaro Sanchez, who is the Environmental Equity Director at the Greenlining Institute. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alvaro to discuss a little bit about the connection between climate change, jobs, and workforce development.
Yes, thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm going to share my screen here, so just give me 1 second to bring that up. Hopefully everyone can see it. Just give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen now. Excellent. Thank you, everyone. My name is Alvaro Sanchez. I'm the Director of Environmental Equity at the Greenlining Institute. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I want to talk, to you a little bit about why racial equity matters in climate policy, and specifically why it matters in the context of economic development as it associates with climate change. Before we get started, I want to give you a little bit of information about the Greenlining Institute. We are a 27-year-old research, policy, advocacy, and leadership development organization based out of Oakland, California, but we take a statewide approach to all of our work. We envision a nation where communities of color thrive and race is never a barrier to economic opportunity. And before going on to my concrete comments about the economy and climate change, I wanted to share with you our definition for racial equity. It's really important for me to begin with this definition because it really underpins everything that we do in the organization and everything we do as it relates to climate policy and economic policy. For us, racial equity means transforming the behaviors, institutions, and systems that disproportionately harm people of color. It means increasing access to power, redistributing and providing additional resources, and eliminating barriers to opportunity in order to empower low-income communities of color to thrive and reach their full potential. Now, it's really important for me to share this definition with you because as we all may have seen over the last several months, equity and racial justice have become words that are pretty familiar to us because of the context that we are living in. But it's important for us to have a definition that we share common purpose around because we all may not define equity in the same way. So I wanted to share this definition as a foundation for the next slides that I'm going to share. So as we all have seen, COVID-19 has really pulled the curtain back on the impacts that our communities are facing and the way that our economy is functioning in this country. When I noticed the COVID-19 map of Oakland, I couldn't help but notice a similarity to two other maps that I'm very familiar with. The 1937 Oakland redlining map is one of them. And the redlining map, for those of you that don't know, redlining was a policy that restricted the ability of people of color to gain access into home ownership and essentially barred communities of color from intergenerational wealth built out of that home ownership opportunity. That map was very similar to the Calenviro stream map, which I'm very familiar with because it's the mapping tool that California uses to identify communities that are burdened by poverty and pollution. And the COVID-19 map had similar, very striking similarities in who was most impacted as it related to who has the most cases and who was being impacted the most in terms of mortality rates. Now, these maps are actually very similar to the ones in San Francisco. And I have another slide I should have brought with me today that overlays those. And it's essentially the same communities. And the reason why it's important for me to share this with you is because as we are thinking about recovering from the COVID-19 crisis and the ensuing economic crisis that it's bringing on, and as we're thinking about addressing climate change, it's really important that we focus on not going back to a future in which we allow communities to be disproportionately impacted by our climate change impacts and our socioeconomic impacts. We need to come back from these crises much stronger than we are today, and climate change policy is going to have a critical role in the way that we recover from these multiple crises. Another piece of foundational information that I wanted to share with you today is this persistent wealth inequality gap that we see in the United States. Because of policies like redlining and because of things like slavery, people of color have never been able to generate enough multi-generational wealth as white people in this country. And this results in real life impacts. And what you see here today, this is from Forbes. It's not some left-leaning progressive outlet. This is from a publication, and in their publication, they're just stating the facts. People of color have less wealth than white people do. And this forecast of it increasing was actually before COVID-19 hit. During the pandemic, we've had 56 new billionaires in this country at the same time that 8 million people have fallen into poverty. And those people are most likely to be people of color, particularly women. And that's actually super critical because women's prosperity is one of the biggest tools that we have at our disposal to fighting climate change. Now, what does this all mean for climate? What I'm showing you here is a list of California's core climate policies. And the reason why I'm showing you these is because I just want to illustrate how all-encompassing our climate work is. This is going to guide everything that we do in the state, from our car manufacturing, from our housing, from our appliances, our food, our built infrastructure, our parks. Everything is underpinned under this climate strategy. And similar to what San Francisco is currently doing with the Climate Action Plan, is going to have a tremendous impact on everything that the city is doing as it relates to living in the city. And this also indicates the level of potential economic opportunity and work opportunity associated with climate change policy, because all of this work is going to require new jobs, new technologies, new investments, etc. And I want to focus on one part of California's climate policy, which is cap and trade. It's a system that we use in California to put a price on carbon. Now, this system has a lot of controversy and things that I won't get into today, but what I want to focus on is on the fact that through 2019, the system has generated $12.7 billion worth of investments into programs like the ones that you see listed here. These are concrete programs that generate economic opportunity. This is housing, transportation, rail, water, soils. These are real life things that we're making investments in and that have economic opportunity attached to them. But just focusing on climate policy is not going to undo the root cause issues that create the inequalities that we see today. So what we at Greenlining are focusing on is moving away from a redlined focused economy into a greenlined focused economy. And what we see here is that a redline focused economy is the one that we currently live in today, one that is really at the root, has power, racism, and profit, and whose outputs are things like white supremacy, income inequality, climate change, and concentration of power. We need to upset the setup, and we need to think about a future in which our economic system is one that is rooted in equity, in equitable distribution of power, centering communities of color, so that we can have racial justice, shared prosperity, and resilient ecosystems as the output of that economic system. But getting to that economic system is going to require rules and standards, and it's really important for us to focus on these. The rules and standards that Greenlining imagines having to use to be able to achieve that kind of economic prosperity of a greenline economy are the ones that you see here on the screen. We need to focus on things like emphasizing anti-racist solutions so we can actually address the wealth disparities that we see that are focused on race. We also need to deliver intentional benefits so that those people with the least amount of resources are seen in our future economic systems and are actually brought up to parity with everybody else. We need to establish paths towards wealth building so that people who have been barred from economic opportunity actually participate. And again, I want to emphasize the role of women in this role, in that women's economic prosperity is a key strategy for us to be able to address the climate change impacts that we see today. And these community investment standards are the types of things that we imagine being adopted in a climate action plan, in a stimulus package, in a new policy to address climate change. These are the rules that will govern that. And over time, those rules will lead to systematic changes that eventually achieve a transformational economic development like the Greenlining economy framework that I presented previously. So now I just want to focus on a just transition specifically. This is coming from a report in which it studied successful transitions from one industry to another. And it found that there was 4 pillars that we needed to focus on as successful things that need to be included in that transition. Now, these include strong government support. Government actually has to be almost the first one in, last one out when it comes to a transition. Without government support, a transition is not going to be successful. Government sets the rules, it sets the standard. So they really need to play a heavy hand in the transition. We need dedicated funding streams for the transition. Without funding, this is not possible. We need funding for retraining, repurposing, for developing new economic systems, and it's actually really critical that we dedicate funding to the activity. We need strong, diverse coalitions. This means the political leverage and the political will that will make it possible to pull away from entrenched systems that want to extend the life of fossil fuels and are able to achieve progress on a just transition. And finally, we need economic diversification. We cannot just replace one industry for another. We have to actually have diverse opportunities so that people are able to benefit from multiple economic angles that they can look for in the future. To us, this combined has a triple bottom line output in which economic stimulus, racial equity, and community resilience are built in. And these things are super important to keep in mind as you all are thinking about a just economic recovery for San Francisco in the context of the climate action work that you're doing. So I'm gonna pause there and end my presentation, but really, as we recover from this crisis, we need to reimagine the future, and we need to make transformative change to be able to allow not only a cleaner planet, but one that's actually more just and equitable. Thank you for your time, yeah, I'll pause there.